It was the most exclusive party of the year at the Hampton estate when the unthinkable happened. 200 guests among New York's wealthiest watched little Matthew Richardson, 8 years old, in his golden wheelchair as his grandmother Elizabeth, Baroness of American finance, proudly presented her grandson to high society. But when the boys saw that woman in blue uniform serving champagne among the guests, something extraordinary happened. With a voice that pierced the elegant silence of the ballroom, Matthew screamed a word that shook the foundations of the Richardson empire. "Mommy!" All eyes turned to Sofia Martinez, the Hispanic maid who had been cleaning the marble floors of that mansion for 6 months, now paralyzed with a tray in her hands and face white as a sheet. What no one knew was that Sofia harbored a devastating secret. Matthew was truly her son, kidnapped by the Richardson family when he was only 2 years old, and now she had returned under false pretenses to reclaim the child they had torn away from her. But the truth about to emerge would destroy much more than one family. Sofia Martinez had planned that moment for 3 long years. Since discovering that her son Matthew, presumed dead in a car accident that killed her husband, was actually alive and being raised by the most powerful family in New York. Now, dressed in the blue uniform of domestic staff, she moved silently among the guests of the gala hosted by Elizabeth Richardson, serving champagne with hands that trembled imperceptibly. The Hampton estate dominated Long Island's Gold Coast from its hilltop perch. Every surface gleamed with precious marble. Every corner displayed artwork worth millions. Sofia had spent 6 months memorizing every hallway, every room, every habit of the family that had stolen her son. The accident 3 years ago hadn't been chance. A private investigator, paid with her last savings, had shown her photos of Matthew playing in the gardens of the Richardson estate. Her husband Carlos had discovered something important about the illegal dealings of the Richardson family, and they had eliminated him. But instead of killing the child too, Elizabeth Richardson had seen an opportunity. Matthew was born with a spinal malformation that confined him to a wheelchair, but he had extraordinary intelligence. The matriarch, who had never had children of her own, had orchestrated the kidnapping by making it appear as a death in the accident. She had falsified adoption documents, bribed doctors and judges, and raised Matthew as her grandson, the perfect heir to her financial empire. Sofia had spent years preparing for this moment. She had changed her name, appearance, personal history. She had gotten herself hired as domestic help through a compliant agency, studied every detail of life in the mansion. Every night, while cleaning the rooms, she searched for evidence of the kidnapping, documents that could incriminate the matriarch. Seeing Matthew from afar every day was torture. The child didn't recognize her. He was too young when they took him away. But Sofia saw in his blue eyes the same features as Carlos, the same shy smile he had inherited from his father. Matthew had become a polite and intelligent child, but there was a deep sadness in him that broke Sofia's heart. Elizabeth Richardson was a 70-year-old woman with silver hair always pulled back in a perfect chignon, and ice-cold eyes that never showed emotion. She commanded her financial empire with an iron fist, but with Matthew she was different. She truly loved him, in her own way, and this made everything more complicated. That evening's party celebrated Matthew's 8th birthday, but also the official announcement that the child would become the universal heir to the Richardson empire. 200 guests, including politicians, entrepreneurs, and New York aristocrats, were present to witness the moment. Sofia knew this was her only chance. After the official announcement, Matthew would be even more protected, even more inaccessible. She had hidden a recorder in the room, hoping to capture some compromising conversation. She had prepared a plan to take Matthew away that very night. While serving champagne to New York's powerful elite, Sofia watched her son sitting in the golden wheelchair at the center of the ballroom. Matthew wore a small blue tuxedo, and smiled politely at the approaching guests. But Sofia saw beyond the smile. She saw a child who felt alone despite being surrounded by hundreds of people. When their eyes finally met across the crowd, something magical and terrible happened simultaneously. Matthew stared at her for a long moment, as if a buried memory was emerging from the depths of his consciousness. And then, with a voice that cut through the elegant murmur of the party, he screamed the word Sofia had been waiting 3 years to hear. The silence that followed was deafening. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward Sofia, who remained paralyzed with the champagne tray in her hands. Elizabeth Richardson paled, immediately understanding that something terrible was about to happen. And Matthew, oblivious to the embarrassment he had created, stretched his arms toward the woman his heart had recognized despite everything. The crystal tray slipped from Sofia's hands, shattering on the marble floor with a sound that resonated like a gunshot in the silence of the room. Glass shards scattered at the feet of New York's most important guests, but no one moved. All eyes were fixed on that impossible scene. A disabled child calling a simple domestic worker Mommy. Sofia looked into her son's eyes and saw that Matthew had truly recognized her. Not rationally. He was too young when they took him away, but with that deep instinct that binds a mother to her child beyond time and separation. The tears she had held back for 3 years began to flow down her face. Elizabeth Richardson reacted immediately. With the coldness that had made her queen of American finance, she approached Matthew and placed a protective hand on his shoulder. She told the guests that the child must be confused. Perhaps he had mistaken the maid for someone else. But Matthew wouldn't be distracted. The child began moving his wheelchair toward Sofia, pushing the wheels with a determination that surprised everyone. The guests stepped aside, forming a corridor, as if witnessing something sacred and terrible at the same time. Matthew stopped in front of Sofia and whispered something that brought down all the woman's defenses. Sofia fell to her knees in front of the wheelchair, ignoring the moisture soaking her uniform and the shocked stares of the guests. She took Matthew's small hands in hers and, with a voice broken by emotion, began to sing softly the lullaby she had sung to him every night for the first 2 years of his life. It was a traditional Mexican song her grandmother had taught her, one she had never sung to anyone else. Matthew closed his eyes and smiled for the first time since Sofia had been watching him in the mansion. Not the polite smile he reserved for guests, but the spontaneous, happy smile of a child who had found his mother again. He began humming along with her, remembering words he thought he had forgotten forever. Elizabeth Richardson understood the situation was slipping from her control. With an imperious gesture, she called the bodyguards discreetly positioned at the corners of the room. But before they could intervene, one of the guests, a famous investigative journalist named Robert Sterling, began asking uncomfortable questions. Sterling had always suspected there was something strange behind the sudden appearance of the matriarch's grandson. Now, seeing this scene, his journalistic instincts had activated. He asked the matriarch if she could explain how a simple maid knew such an intimate lullaby for the child. Other guests began murmuring. Some remembered hearing strange rumors about Matthew's adoption, but no one had ever dared investigate the Richardson family secrets. Now, faced with this scene, doubts that had been buried for years began to resurface. Sofia knew this was the moment of truth. Standing up, but still holding Matthew's hand in hers, she looked straight into Elizabeth Richardson's eyes. With a voice that trembled but was clear as crystal, she spoke the words she had practiced 1,000 times in front of the mirror. The silence that followed was more deafening than before. Even the waiters had stopped. The musicians had ceased playing. Even the sound of New York traffic seemed to have stopped. Elizabeth Richardson looked at Sofia with eyes that mixed anger, fear, and something that resembled respect for this woman's courage. Matthew looked confused between the grandmother he had learned to love and the woman his heart recognized as Mommy. His little voice broke the silence with an innocent question that had just triggered the biggest scandal New York society had ever seen. And Sofia knew there was no turning back now. Elizabeth Richardson knew the game was over. 3 years of lies were about to crumble in front of 200 witnesses. Robert Sterling, the journalist, had pulled out his phone and was recording everything. Sofia began telling the true story. Her husband Carlos wasn't just a construction worker, but an anti-corruption informant who had discovered the connections between the Richardsons and money laundering. The car accident hadn't been random. Sofia had evidence of sabotage and compromising phone calls. Elizabeth's stroke of genius had been not killing Matthew. The child had survived with the spinal injury, and the matriarch had seen an opportunity, the perfect heir that no one was looking for, since everyone believed him dead. Sofia pulled out a small recorder from her uniform pocket. The matriarch's voice filled the ballroom, recorded 3 nights earlier when she thought she was alone with her lawyer. The words confessed everything.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
Carlos's murder, Matthew's kidnapping, the falsified documents. Hearing her own voice confessing the kidnapping made Elizabeth pale. Matthew listened with wide eyes, and with a broken voice asked his grandmother if she had hurt his real daddy. The innocent question broke the matriarch. The woman who had commanded a billion-dollar empire collapsed to her knees in front of the child, confessing through tears Carlos's murder, the kidnapping, 3 years of lies. But she also explained how much she loved him, how he had become the only important thing in her life. Police arrived within minutes. As they led Elizabeth away in handcuffs, she turned to Sofia, with the last words she would ever speak as a free woman. When Sofia knelt in front of Matthew, whispering sweet words, the child smiled and took her hand. The mansion that had been his golden prison was crumbling, but he had finally found his mother again. The following days were a whirlwind of interrogations and revelations that kept all of America glued to the news. Sofia had to face a bureaucratic ordeal to regain custody of Matthew. The documents falsified by the matriarch were technically perfect, but DNA testing didn't lie. Matthew was the son of Sofia and Carlos Martinez. The child went through a difficult period. For 3 years he had lived in luxury. Now he found himself in a modest Brooklyn apartment. But what struck Matthew wasn't the loss of luxury, but discovering he had a real history. Sofia showed him photos from when he was little, told him about Carlos, the brave father who had sacrificed his life for justice. America mobilized to help the Martinez family. Donations came from across the country. Doctors volunteered to treat Matthew for free. But most importantly, Matthew began to smile again. Not the polite smile from the mansion, but the spontaneous one of a happy child. The matriarch's trial was followed by all media. During the hearings, Matthew asked to speak to Elizabeth. With the wisdom of an 8-year-old, he said words that made everyone in the courtroom cry. He acknowledged the wrong she had done, but confessed he still loved her because she had treated him well. The sentence was life imprisonment. But Elizabeth wanted to leave all her wealth to Matthew. Sofia, after much reflection, decided to accept. She would create a foundation to help disabled children and crime victim families. The matriarch's dirty money would become hope. Matthew approved the decision. He had learned that money doesn't bring happiness, but it can do good. And for the first time, he felt truly at home. 1 year after the party that changed everything, Sofia and Matthew lived a completely different life. The Brooklyn apartment had become too small to host all the people wanting to help the Matthew Martinez Foundation, so they moved to a larger house, still in the working-class neighborhood Sofia loved. The foundation had already helped hundreds of disabled children and their families. Sofia had hired a team of professionals to manage the $3 billion of inheritance, but she personally handled every case that came to the foundation. She knew what it meant to feel alone and desperate, and wanted no parent to go through what she had experienced. Matthew had become the Foundation's little ambassador. Despite his young age, he participated in meetings, suggested initiatives, and, most importantly, made other disabled children he met feel less alone. His story had given hope to thousands of families struggling with similar situations. But the biggest change was in Matthew's soul. The polite, somewhat sad child who lived at the Richardson estate had become a lively boy full of projects. He had rediscovered that spontaneity the artificial environment of the mansion had made him lose. Sofia had begun writing the book about her story. It wasn't easy reliving those 3 years of pain and searching, but she knew her experience could help other parents going through similar tragedies. The book would become a bestseller and a movie that would move millions of people. Elizabeth Richardson had died in prison 6 months after sentencing. Doctors said it was a heart attack, but Sofia knew she had died of heartbreak. Despite everything she had done, Sofia felt pain at her death. Before dying, Elizabeth had written a letter to Matthew that her lawyers delivered to Sofia. In the letter, the matriarch explained to the child why she had done what she did, apologized for the harm caused, but most importantly, told him how proud she was of the man he was becoming. Sofia decided to give Matthew the letter when he was old enough to understand it. At 10 years old, the child read it seriously, and then said something that surprised his mother. He asked to put flowers on grandmother Elizabeth's grave. Matthew's wisdom moved Sofia. Her son was growing up without hatred in his heart, despite everything he had been through. This was the true miracle, not finding each other after 3 years, but the fact that love had conquered hate. On Matthew's 10th birthday, Sofia organized a party at the Foundation headquarters. There were no matriarchs or corrupt politicians, but hundreds of children who had received help thanks to the Foundation. There were families reunited, parents who hadn't given up. When it came time to blow out the candles, Matthew made a wish that brought tears of joy to his mother's eyes. It was the most beautiful wish a child could express, and Sofia knew that with the Foundation, they were already working to make it reality, one child at a time. 5 years after the party that shocked New York, Sofia Martinez sat in her office at the Matthew Martinez Foundation, looking at reports showing the extraordinary results achieved. 3,000 disabled children helped, 500 families reunited after traumatic separations, 10 rehabilitation centers built across America. Matthew, now 13, had become a confident young man full of plans for the future. His disability no longer limited him as it once had. He had learned to see it as a part of himself that made him special, not different. He had become a passionate speaker for disability rights, and his speech at the United Nations at age 12 had gone around the world. Sofia looked through her office window and saw Matthew in the Foundation courtyard, helping a younger child take first steps with new prosthetics. It was an image that filled her with pride every day. Her son using his own experience to help other children overcome their difficulties. Sofia's book had inspired the creation of similar foundations worldwide. The movie based on the book had won 3 Academy Awards and made millions of viewers cry. But for Sofia, the greatest success was seeing Matthew grow up happy and balanced. The Martinez family story had changed many things in America. Adoption laws had been reformed to prevent cases similar to Matthew's. Controls on assets of dubious origin had been strengthened. And most importantly, public opinion had developed new sensitivity toward disabled children and their families. But there was another unexpected result of their story. Sofia had received thousands of letters from parents who had lost children under mysterious circumstances, and who, inspired by her experience, had resumed searching for them. Thanks to the Foundation, 27 families had been reunited after years of separation. One evening, while Sofia and Matthew dined in their Brooklyn apartment, they had chosen to remain in the working-class neighborhood despite being able to afford any luxury. The boy asked a question that had been tormenting him for some time. Sofia looked at her son, who resembled Carlos more and more. not just physically, but in character. He had the same determination, the same thirst for justice, the same love for those in difficulty. She replied that his father would have been the proudest man in the world. Matthew smiled, that same smile that had illuminated Sofia's face the first time he recognized her at the Richardson estate party. He had grown, changed, but that smile remained the same, pure, authentic, full of love. On the 15th anniversary of Carlos's death, Sofia and Matthew visited the cemetery where he was buried. On the tomb, they had engraved a phrase that summed up everything, words about a silent hero whose truth had lit an eternal flame. While walking among the graves, Matthew said something that surprised his mother. He wanted to study law and become a prosecutor to continue the work Daddy couldn't finish. Sofia felt her heart swell with pride. Her son was choosing to follow in his father's footsteps, to continue that fight for justice that had cost Carlos his life. It was the circle closing, proof that love and truth always win. That evening, before sleeping, Sofia looked at Carlos's photo she kept on the nightstand. She whispered to him that they had made it, that Matthew had become the man he would have wanted, that the justice he died for had finally triumphed. The story that began with a cry of "Mommy" in a ballroom full of powerful people had become a legend of maternal love and determination. And every day, at the Matthew Martinez Foundation headquarters, that cry continued to resonate as a call to truth, justice, and the unstoppable force of a mother's love who never gave up. Elizabeth Richardson's empire had collapsed, but the empire of love that Sofia and Matthew had built on its ashes grew every day, strong in the certainty that when a mother truly loves, nothing in the world can stop her. Because a mother's love is the most powerful force in the universe, and when it manifests, it can move mountains, tear down walls, and make a child scream, "Mommy," recognizing the heart that carried him in the womb, even after years of separation and pain. Like if you believe a mother's love can overcome any obstacle, comment which moment touched you most. Share to inspire those who never give up in searching for truth. Subscribe for more stories of love, family, and triumphant justice. Sometimes one word screamed by a child can bring down an empire of lies. Sometimes truth needs years to emerge, but when it does, nothing can stop it. And sometimes a mother's love is so strong it recognizes its own child, even after years of separation.